Did you have something to say?
I was going
Oh,
three.
you're me down. Okay.
Two,
All right.
one. I think
All
that
right,
we
I'm
should
ready for
keep
it
this
now.
as part of the podcast.
I'm ready.
People
for
want to know the backstory.
3, 2, 1. All right. Hey, everybody. I'm Matt Valley, and this is the Rock and Roll Research Podcast, where we share the super cool backstories and side gigs of the research and insights pros that you trust. Today's guest is Diane Hessan, one of the great entrepreneurs, leaders, investors, innovators, and visionary thinkers in the field of insights. Diane pioneered the creation of and utilization of online communities for the purpose of market research when she founded her company Communispace, which is now known as C-Space, purchased by Omnicom, right?
Yeah.
Where Diane still serves as chairman of the board. But she is also the past recipient of the Most Admired CEO Award from the Boston Business Journal and was a national finalist for Ernst & Young's Entrepreneur of the Year. She's a best-selling author, more on that in a moment, and serves on several boards, including Panera, the editorial board of the Boston Globe, and my graduate school alma mater, Tufts University. So appreciate you there, Diane. But on top of all of that, of course, did you know that Diane is the founder of an a cappella singing group called the Sound Bytes? That's Bytes with a Y. She will tell us all about that, her upcoming book, and more on today's podcast. Welcome to the show, Diane.
Thank you, Matt. Great to be here.
Well, I'm very happy to have you here. So I've been wanting to meet you for a very long time. Super glad that our mutual friend Susan Griffin put us in touch, and you're sharing some thoughts on the podcast. So I really appreciate that.
Happy to be here.
So tell us a little bit about the origin story of Communispace and how you sort of connected in this field of insights.
Sure. You know, I guess to understand the Communispace story, you have to understand a little bit about my entrepreneurial journey. So in the beginning of my career, I worked for companies and I had bosses and all of those things that entrepreneurs don't like to do. And I worked for one company that was actually in the training and development business. I had a marketing background, so I had, done marketing, done market research, etc. But I rose through the ranks of this company. I got to the point where I was very, very senior. And at the end of one particularly good year, I had a performance review with my boss. And he had been hinting that he was going to leave and maybe become chairman and look for a new CEO. And at the end of my performance review, which was really good that year, I said to him, John, I don't want to kick you out, but if for any reason you really are serious about stepping aside, I think I could be the next CEO and do a great job.
Awesome.
And he said, Diane, someday you're going to be a great CEO, but right now you're a work in progress. And Matt, I was devastated. Because I didn't spend a lot of my life really knowing what I wanted to do. And I finally knew that what I wanted to do was to build and lead an enterprise that really mattered.
Sure.
And I just couldn't get that job. I had actually asked a previous boss about being CEO. And I finally came to the realization that there was a very easy way to become a CEO. And that was to start my own company and call myself that title, which actually is not a joke. I mean, I know a zillion entrepreneurs now. I live in Boston. I've been kind of at this for a couple of decades, doing startups and everything. But I have this theory that there are two kinds of entrepreneurs. There are people who are inspired by their idea. They've got an idea, they build an app, they sell it to Google, and then they move on. They flip it. They get another idea, they build that app, they build that software, they sell it to PayPal, and then they move on, etc. And the inspiration comes from having the idea.
Right.
That wasn't me. I didn't really focus on the idea. I had a couple of good ideas. I knew how to generate them, but what I was really focused on was building a company and not selling it. Building a company that really made a dent in the universe. So I wanted to be a CEO. I didn't want to be a CEO of a 5-person company. I wanted to be CEO of a company that felt big and that really mattered. So that's why we started Communispace. the first idea I had basically didn't work. We were building online communities, but we were doing it so that companies could use them as a way for people internally to share best practices and give each other advice. So think intranet on steroids.
Right.
A
Yeah.
way for people, especially big companies dispersed all over the place. And it wasn't working. The software was good, the idea was good, people were buying it from us, but all of our communities were dead. I mean, we would launch a community and 48 hours later, from a community of 200 people, 2 would have come in, 3 would have come in, 7, but they were dead. And we all remember that, at the turn of the century, in the beginning of communities, like people would go, oh, we're tennis.com. We have 1 million users.
Right.
You'd go into tennis.com and you'd ask a question and, you'd get like 1.5 responses.
Yeah.
People came in once and then left. I've told this story many times, but we basically had a lucky day. I was at Hallmark, where our client, Tom Brailsford, was about to launch with us an internal community to help their store managers improve their performance. Tom looked at me and said, Diane, I love what you're doing, but I just don't know if these store managers are going to come into the community. And I looked at him and said, I don't know if they're going to come in either.
Right.
And there was silence. And then he looked at me and said, I think I might have a better idea. He said, just think about it, Hallmark, we're a card company. We have a huge innovation agenda because maybe no one is going to send cards out anymore as we move into the new millennium. What do you think instead about bringing our customers in here? Our target customer is, moms with little kids. We could bring them in. We could learn about their lives. We could run our ideas by them. I don't know. Just what do you think? Well, here in a previous life, I had done a lot of work with more strategic work in helping corporations kind of wire the voice of the customer into their organizations. We didn't really call it research, but I wrote a book called Customer-Centered Growth. And so I said to my client, Tom, I know a little bit about how you listen to customers. It's just that that's not what I was doing in my new startup. We went back. Long story short, we built the Hallmark Idea Exchange for Parents in November of 2000, and the thing went wild. The moms came in, they could not believe that Hallmark wanted to hear what they had to say.
Yeah.
But Tom Brailsford is calling me every 30 minutes going, did you see what that one said? Did you see what that one said? I mean, we barely knew what we were doing, but we knew that we had really hit a nerve, that we figured out a way through the magic of technology to help companies understand and get inspiration and insight from their consumers on a continuous basis. So why would you put 10 people in a room for an hour when you could have 500 people figuratively sitting in that room available to you all the time and feeding themselves? Yeah. And so Tom was our first client. He was so excited about what we were doing that he called Business Week and said, I work for Hallmark. I'm doing something that I think is going to change the face of the research industry. You should hear more about it. And so with one client, there was an article about us in Business Week.
Wow.
And 2 months later, he came to a conference with me. It wasn't ARF, but it was some big market research conference. I was on one bar stool. He was on the other. I interviewed him about what he was doing. One guy, who shall remain nameless, got up and started screaming, "This isn't research, right? It's blasphemy. What you're talking about is awful. There's no way that you should ever ask somebody a question and then a week later ask a question of that same person. This is wrong. No one's on the internet." I mean, he's screaming, and I won't mention the person, but he eventually got into the business. Yeah. And I was trying to be humble and saying, look, I'm not saying it's research, right?
Right.
This is not a representative sample. This is not quantitative research. This is not statistically significant, but there is something magical happening here because we're learning things from consumers that heretofore were only possible to learn by actually being with them in person. And when you do it online, you can actually scale all of that unbelievable qualitative data that you get from clients. So that's how it all started. And oh, I mean, I say to people, Matt, it was about 3.5 years of hell, followed by 10 years of just glory
Yeah.
and super fun. I mean, when it took us a while to figure things out. Internet bubble burst. We had a massive case of employee fraud. We were running out of money. We had raised about 20 million in venture capital. Just
Wow.
lots of drama. But by around 2004, things really started coming together. We had a critical mass of clients who were early adopters, who were really willing to go on an adventure with us.
Yeah.
And the word started spreading. We had happy clients. I'd go to every conference there was, and I never made a speech. I'd always come in with another client, and they'd tell their story, and people would look at me and go, "Oh my gosh, there's Diane with another happy client." We would just laugh at the whole thing, but it was very exciting. And of course, the most, as time went on, we got way more sophisticated. We learned a lot about how to get people to open up. We learned a lot about how to get very creative with our software. And we were doing heat mapping and, Mad Libs and collages and, all really, really interesting sorts of things with our clients. And then probably by 2005, 6, 7, we had another breakthrough, which is that we really built a lot of capability to learn how to basically take what we were learning and make it come alive for clients and create stuff that was beautiful, that senior management really wanted to hear about, so that it didn't look like boring research.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating because I can scarcely think of another company that was as disruptive to the research industry, particularly like the supplier side, as Communispace was at that time, working for other suppliers that were sort of desperate to try to do what Communispace was doing, and you were always 2 steps ahead, right? Because it's like, oh, hey, let's recruit some people and we make a community. But there's a discipline behind really getting those key insights out, and it seems like you're always a step ahead in terms of understanding that.
Well, thank you. One of the things that really helped is it was all we did.
Yeah, right.
We were not a large research company saying, why don't we give this a shot? I mean, this was all we did. And the deal was that we wanted to be better than anybody else in the world at that one thing.
Yeah.
Which was, to build these communities where when consumers or customers came in, that they would have an experience that was seductive, where they really just got to the point where they said, nobody listens to me in my life. This is an experience that makes me feel important and heard and creative, and I'm going to just give it my all. And we were always very focused on making sure that the experience that the community members had was great. We knew that if we did that, we'd learn stuff that was really surprising. Yeah. And the clients would be happy. I remember once a client said to me, I'm trying to think, it might have been somebody it was a hair care company. And she said to me, look, I've heard great things about you, but I just want you to know that I have spent 12 years in this company, 12 years listening to women tell me about how they wash their hair, how they dry their hair, and how they condition their hair. I dare you to tell me something I never knew before. I mean, those were so exciting. And I think the other thing, when you talk about disruption, I don't know if the disruption was no one will ever do a focus group anymore because people are still doing focus groups and getting great value from them. I think that the disruption was we were trying to change the nature of the relationship between companies and their customers.
Right.
So yeah. I had a client named Gretchen Waitley at Kraft, and she called me one day, and she was an early adopter, and she said to me, okay, so I have to tell you a story. She said, I was sitting with my colleagues, we're doing a focus group, and we're on the other side of the mirror. We're watching all these women talking about whatever. We're eating our M&Ms. And by mistake, one of my colleagues kind of went and leaned on his chair. And by mistake, he hit the light switch and the lights went on in the room and all the customers turned around and stared at us. She said, and Diane, do you know what we did? We all hit the floor. She said, here I was in one of the most extraordinary CPG companies in the world, and yet our instinct when we were actually face to face with the customer was to hide.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Was to not let them know that we were there and listening. She said, my goal in using this Communispace community is to change that forever. Right. So that was so inspiring to me when she told me that. And of course, then I tell all the other employees, here's what we're doing, right? This is not research. We're trying to change the entire relationship between companies and the people who buy from them and use their products and everything else. So yeah, it was a pretty heady experience.
Yeah, it's just fascinating. And what's so interesting about it too is it's a way to understand consumers, but it can be also used as a way to understand people at large or voters, right? And we're going to talk about that in a second, right? So a little foreshadowing there. But first, this is a rock and roll research podcast, right? So I think I read somewhere that you have an a cappella singing group called the Sound Bytes, and I've got to hear about that. So tell me a little about that.
Sure. I always loved a cappella, and true confession, I'm not a great singer, but there are two things that I can do really well. One is I can write lyrics that rhyme and that have the right tempo. And the other thing is that I can harmonize. So, sometimes if you're doing harmony, like, when you're growing up, you do row, row, row your boat and you start at different times and everything. A lot of people have to go like this, like they can sing it, but they have to close their ears. I just didn't have to do that. I could always kind of figure out the harmonies and everything. And I just had this idea that it would be really fun. I noticed as I was listening to a cappella, remember there was the Capitol Steps? Remember, I don't know if you know about the Capitol Steps, but that was an a cappella group based on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. that sang about politics. But it'd be so much fun to do something about business. And I had this idea and I sold it to a friend of mine who ran an educational technology conference.
Okay.
And I knew a group, and a couple of my friends, me, a songwriter, joined up with an existing a cappella group, and we created the Sound Bytes. And we basically took songs that everybody knew, and we would rewrite the words so that it was customized to the conference.
Okay.
So the group, basically, we already knew the harmonies, we knew how to sing the songs, but whenever we went somewhere, we'd learn new lyrics, and the lyrics were funny. And so for the first conference we did, it was a 3-day conference, and every single time there was a general session, which was probably about 8 times, famous speakers and all of that, they bring us up. And Elliot Mazie would say, and now the Sound Bytes, and we'd come running onto the stage and we'd sing and we'd introduce the next speaker. And it was so successful that we ended up doing that conference itself 4 years in a row. And that was kind of a springboard for us doing it with other people. It was really fun. I mean, we all had day jobs. I was building Communispace. One was an orthopedic surgeon. One had her own PR firm. Another one was a fundraiser at Harvard. Just lots of different people, but we all loved singing. And what we used to do at the end, if we did a conference, is we would say to everybody in the audience, look, for the final session of this conference, we need 100 volunteers who want to sing a cappella with us. And the Friday morning sessions were always like, the last session was 10 o'clock in the morning or whatever. So we'd say, we want to meet you at 7 o'clock. Come on in. We'll break you into 4 groups and teach you the different parts. And we used to have these moving final songs at the conferences where all of a sudden you had all these people just lit up, excited, and singing our final song. So I think the fun part of it was, again, it was the community and bringing people together and not taking ourselves so seriously as we were sitting there learning some pretty serious stuff.
Yeah, yeah. What a great way to bring people together too.
Yeah.
And me, I'm a music person, of course, and so it's just wonderful to hear. As busy as you are, there's still time to be cut out for music. It's just wonderful that way.
Well, you can relate to this because obviously you have a podcast called Rock and Roll. I mean, I've always found that there's so much room for music in business.
Yeah.
At Communispace, we had a couple of things. We had like a jazz thing every single year. I mean, the company was, but as you know, I know you had Paul Coley.
Yeah, I also had Jordan Cusner as well.
And Jordan Cusner,
yeah,
who's a Berkeley School of Music musician. I mean, we
right.
had a lot of musicians in our company. Great, big, talented people. And so every year we do a jazz concert and they'd play and they'd figure out their songs. We had people who were amazing singers and, everybody in the company would sit around and drink, and it was just another way to bring people together. Or we had Communispace Follies, which was kind of like Saturday Night Live with lots of songs.
Yeah.
Where we get really talented people to come in and, spend 2 hours in a show that we all wrote that made fun of the company. And, people, my head of HR once said to me, Diane, I think that Follies is like the #1 reason that people say that they stay at the company. Like they're not going to leave because if they leave, they can't be in the show next year. Like just the idea of, because we finished that show and the following day everybody's saying, I have 4 ideas for skits for next year and, everything else. It was just a wonderful way to bring people together. So.
Yeah. Now, if you ever sell outside tickets, please let me know, because I've heard the story a couple times now, and I just got to see it.
Yeah, I'm sure there are somewhere in the bowels of YouTube. I'm sure there are videos from Communispace Follies of all of us doing crazy things. And it just really kept us together. There was one employee who actually I was emailing this morning, who was the one always playing me in the skits. And I think she did a better job of me than I did. So, really fun, but lots of great talent, and singing together is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, agreed. Cool, super fun. All right, so back to understanding consumers and people. I'm so excited about the book you have coming out next Tuesday, I believe, right?
Thank you. Yeah.
I have it on pre-order, so I'm waiting for Amazon to do me a solid and bring it to
I appreciate the support.
But as far as I understand it, so some of the work that you've done in journalism with the Boston Globe and others, some of the articles you've published about understanding voters have just been super insightful over the last few years, when it's been very difficult to really understand the really, if you will, of what voters are thinking. And I know that your book is partially about that. So I'll turn it over to you. Would love to hear about your book coming out and your thoughts on it.
Sure. Through a whole bunch of serendipity in 2016, I started applying what I learned from Communispace and consumers to the political realm.
Right.
And I basically got addicted to it. And instead of I had left a CEO job to basically help the Clinton campaign understand undecided voters in swing states.
Right.
I set up a community. I did all of that stuff. I was sending in reports every week. And when the campaign was over, I was about to take another CEO job. While I was interviewing, they were checking my references. I wrote an article. I wrote a column for the Boston Globe saying, here's what I've been doing. And here's what I learned, and here's what I think it means. And the article went viral.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my gosh, I think I'm making more of a difference after the campaign than before. And I made a decision to not take that next CEO job. That what I did instead was to set up my life. I joined some additional boards, and I set up an angel investment company and decided I was going to take 1/3 of my time and dedicate myself to talking to voters. I didn't really have a plan around it. I just thought it was fascinating and there was so much to learn. So I did a whole new recruit. I recruited 500 people, 10 from every state, all points of the political spectrum, every age, every ethnicity, and started doing with them on a weekly basis what I had learned from Communispace to do with consumers. And it was absolutely phenomenal. To really get to know people. And whenever I learned something that I thought was new or different or interesting, I'd write a column for the Boston Globe. I wrote about 55 columns, and essentially over time, I never stopped. So 4.5 years later, I was still in conversation with all of these voters.
Wow.
And at the end, I thought I was just going to it ended up being a panel. I could geek out with you on why I decided to create a panel instead of a community. But
sure.
At the end of this, I was going to close it all down and just end. And I wrote a final article for the Globe, and that was it. It just wasn't enough. I just decided that I had so much that I wanted to say about what was going on in our country, about what I was learning from real people, about what I thought we needed to do to heal the divides. And my experience was that we should have a lot more hope than we currently have. So I decided to write a book. And basically since last fall, I just woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning, every morning. I'd grab a cup of coffee. Nobody needed me. It was dark. And I'd write for 3 or 4 hours. And I did that every single day until the book was done. And June 22nd, it's coming out. And it's just been a really great experience. I'm excited about it, and I hope it makes a difference.
Yeah, no, this podcast is going to air just a couple of days before the book comes out. So is there any little previews or
sure
that you could offer?
Yeah, I really tried, Matt. I didn't want to write a big intellectual book. I didn't want to write a book for people who spend all their time glued to the TV, who know the ins and outs of everything. I wanted to write this for people who say to me, I can't even talk to my uncle anymore.
Yeah.
Or, my neighbors and we have a really tense relationship because we're on different sides of the political spectrum. Or, I don't understand how all those Democrats can be socialists.
Yeah.
Or how can 35 million Americans think that the November 2020 election was fraudulent? Like, how does that even happen? It's for people like that.
Yeah.
And one of the punchlines is that the book is called Our Common Ground.
Right.
Insights from 4 years of listening to American voters. But one of the punchlines is that there is way more common ground, especially on the issues, than we realize.
Right.
In our country. But, the extremes get the airtime. And so what we think about each other is actually wildly inaccurate. Mm-hmm. And so I try to lay that out, where the common ground is, where the misconceptions are. And of course, my final chapter, which is great for all of us research geeks, is all about how we have to change the conversation in our country and learn how to listen to each other.
Yeah.
And I believe that. I used to say that all the time when I was running Communispace, that listening is an enormously underrated marketing strategy. And it's also an underrated political strategy. It's an underrated relationship strategy.
Yeah.
But, if we really knew what was going on for everybody else, there would be a way forward. It's not the insanity that we're all experiencing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm very much looking forward to it. I was
Thanks
certainly,
for buying it.
yeah, Our Common Ground. So it comes out June 22nd. So very exciting. So it's on the way. I think I get it on Thursday, right? Why? Anyway, okay. So this is the Rock and Roll Research Podcast, Diane. So it's very important that I know this. I know that you're a music lover. I'm a music lover. So let's put that to the test, right?
Yeah.
So you're stranded on a desert island, Diane. You have 3 records of your own choosing, totally your choosing, to keep you company the rest of your days. What are those 3 records?
I'll tell you, it is excruciating to try to narrow it down.
That's the toughest question of the bunch.
Yeah, and the ones I came up with are pretty boring. Like everybody has those albums. So
It's all good.
one is the Eagles' greatest hits.
Oh, yes.
And the reason is, it's funny. There are people who say to me, the Eagles, I'm not really sure I know the Eagles. And then you put that album on and they sing every song on the album. We all know every one of their songs.
Yeah.
Which is the same thing with another one that I had thought about, which is the Beatles, Abbey Road.
Yeah.
Same kind of thing. Although I took that one off my list. And the reason is, have you been reading lately or listening to the podcast and all of the stuff about Marvin Gaye, what's going on?
No.
There's, I can't remember what it was. I think it might be like a Netflix show or something. But I love Motown music.
Yeah.
I grew up with Motown music. I danced with my friends to Motown music. So I have a lot of those albums, The Temptations, The Supremes, all that. But I always loved Marvin Gaye, and I have What's Going On. But there's a great Netflix show about the poetry behind him and what he wrote. So I just started listening to all that music again, and I would take it with me.
Wonderful.
And then I thought, my third one is my favorite classical music album, which is kind of esoteric because a lot of people don't know it, but I recommend you just get online and Google it. It's Elgar's First Symphony.
Okay.
And it starts out with a theme that it carries all through the symphony. And even if you listen to it for the first time, by the time you're at the end and they're playing this thing loudly and grandly and everything, you just feel like you want to stand there and, conduct and sing. The very end is just absolutely beautiful. So there's my little known one in the middle of, the Eagles and the Beatles and Marvin Gaye.
Very good. Very good. Very nice choices and some nice diversity, right? So you can keep interested the whole time. It's not vibes.
Yeah,
so
you don't want all the same stuff.
I know.
Exactly. You don't want all the same stuff. You can't. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, you can't do Rolling Stones and Allman Brothers. Who are my next candidates right in there.
Yeah,
I love Allman Brothers, and I remember when my kids were little, I'd pick them up in the car and I'd be driving, and they'd be playing all this horrible, in sync stuff, and all that. And I'd say, and there was somebody who they loved who was a guitar player who I thought was horrible, and I remember I would put Allman Brothers CDs in the car and say, "Do you want to listen to what good guitar playing is?" And all of a sudden, I had this little group of my kids' friends all into Diane and Greg.
I'm fighting the same battles with my own kids, Diane.
Are you?
Yeah, I know that. I know.
Yeah, the kids these days, they don't know what talent is.
All right. Well, this has been just wonderful. I really appreciate your time. Like I said, I've always been an admirer of your career, and wonderful to sit down and talk about the fun stuff in addition to the work stuff and all of the accolades. So it's great. I really appreciate your time and look forward to reading.
My pleasure. And thanks for wearing the Tufts t-shirt. Go Jumbos.
Jumbos, absolutely. And rock and roll.